The storm outside was brutal, but for Ethan Rourke, the chaos truly erupted inside his tiny freezing shed. He had already lost his harvest, his last chance at solvency, but when he opened his door to a frail, feverish elderly woman and her terrified grandson, the stakes became infinite. The woman, lost to a high fever and profound confusion, fought violently to escape into the deluge, screaming desperately for a red mailbox and a train that did not exist. If Ethan called the police, he risked losing his own daughters when authorities saw his crippling poverty. But if the woman fled, she would surely die in the cold. Trapped between his moral code and the urgent survival of his own family, Ethan faced the terrifying truth: a single act of radical kindness could cost him everything. Yet that very sacrifice was about to invite a massive, unexpected change, a consequence that arrived hours later, silent and imposing in a powerful black SUV. Find out if Ethan Rourke paid the ultimate price for his compassion. Watch the full incredible story now, and please support us by subscribing to the channel. The air in the shed hung heavy and thick-smelling of cool, earth-damp compost and the faint sweet decay of overripe tomatoes. It was a smell Ethan Rourke had known since childhood, a smell that usually brought him comfort, but tonight it only intensified the tightening knot of dread in his stomach. Ethan sat on a worn wooden stool, meticulously wiping condensation from the firm dark green leaves of a basket of organic kale. Outside, the last vestiges of daylight bled from the sky over his small farm on the outskirts of Harmony Creek, Iowa. It was mid-November, the time of year when the earth surrendered its warmth and demanded payment for the gifts it had yielded. Ethan, 36 years old, wore a faded flannel shirt tucked into jeans patched at the knee. His hands, though rough and calloused from years of working the soil, moved with a surprising tenderness over the produce. He treated every head of lettuce and every heirloom carrot like a fragile sculpture, because in truth, they were. They were the last fragments of his livelihood. He glanced down at the pile of unpaid utility bills taped to the wall beside his packing station. The highest was a delinquent notice for the pressurized drip irrigation system he relied on during the dry summer months. The total amount, $3,400, felt like the national debt. "It's the cost of doing it right," he muttered, repeating the mantra he used to silence the relentless internal voice that urged him to switch to cheaper conventional farming methods. Organic certification specialized heirloom seeds, compost instead of chemical fertilizers, they drove his costs up drastically. His loyal customers loved the quality, but there weren't enough of them, and the farmers' market profits barely covered the weekly gas for the old pickup truck. Ethan ran a hand through his perpetually messy brown hair. He wasn't just struggling, he was teetering on the edge of a precipice. The overdue rent on the 10 acres of land was due on the 1st of December 2025. If he couldn't come up with a significant down payment, by then he and his daughters would lose the farm, the tiny, drafty farmhouse and everything that tethered them to this life. A faint sound, the gentle rhythmic breathing of two small children, drifted from the enclosed section of the shed that served as his temporary packing office and sometimes an overflow bedroom. Lily, 8, and Chloe, 5, were nestled together in a sleeping bag beneath a flickering space heater. They were the reason he was still fighting the only things that truly mattered. Lily, his sensible, quiet eldest, had started asking recently why they couldn't have clothes as new as the other children at school. Chloe, his bright, giggling little one, rarely asked for anything, but often watched other families with a wistful longing that felt like a physical pain in his chest. "I have to make this work," he thought, arranging the kale into a recycled paper bag for an order he hoped would be picked up tomorrow morning. "I have to." The knot in his stomach tightened further as a rumble began, not the low, reassuring rumble of his tractor, but something deeper, heavier. Ethan stepped out onto the gravel drive. The sky, already bruised purple, was dissolving into a churning metallic gray. It was the kind of storm that didn't just bring rain, it brought an angry, soaking deluge that seemed personal. He checked his phone. The weather alert was simple and grim flash flood, warning severe thunderstorms expected to intensify over the next few hours. A panic, cold and sharp, seized him. If the rain came hard and fast, the low-lying field where he had planted his last batch of winter root vegetables, carrots, parsnips, and potatoes, would flood. It was his last gamble, his final potential harvest, before the ground froze solid, and it was the income he desperately needed to make the December 2025 rent payment. "No, no, no," he whispered, running toward the field. He spent 10 frantic minutes trying to dig shallow trenches to divert the water mud splattering his face and neck. But it was useless. The first heavy drops began fat, cold pellets hitting the ground, kicking up dust. Within seconds, the drops merged into a torrential, blinding sheet. The storm wasn't just coming, it was already here. He could feel the cold seeping through his clothes. His heart pounded with the sudden crushing realization that he was beaten. The water was already pooling fast around the rows of freshly planted crops. That small final chance was literally washing away before his eyes. Dejected, muddy, and soaked to the bone, Ethan turned back toward the meager light filtering from the shed. He knew he should rush back inside to check on his girls, but the weight of failure rooted him to the spot. It was in that moment of despair, peering through the curtain of the downpour, that he saw them. At first, they looked like phantoms, indistinct shapes struggling against the wind near the gate. Then, as they stumbled closer, Ethan recognized the unmistakable, desperate posture of two people utterly lost. An elderly woman, small and fragile, was being dragged along the uneven gravel by a tiny figure, a boy maybe 5 or 6 years old wearing a soaking yellow raincoat. The woman's silver hair was plastered to her forehead, and she was listing badly, her movements jerky and erratic. The boy was crying, his small legs pumping hard, trying to keep them moving forward, trying to escape the storm. They weren't merely seeking shelter. They looked truly broken. The internal conflict was immediate and sharp, a battle between self-preservation and the core of who Ethan was. "Call 911. You can't handle this. You have nothing to give. You have 2 children sleeping inside. You have no money for an ambulance, no spare medicine, no clean clothes. Don't do it." The voice of reason screamed in his head, cold and practical, listing every deficit he possessed. But then he saw the boy. The child looked up, his face a mask of terror and sheer exhaustion, his eyes wide and pleading. He was pulling the elderly woman with a desperate love, a loyalty that transcended his size and fear. It was a love Ethan instantly understood. He saw Lily and Chloe in that frantic little face. He knew that if his girls were ever stranded, he would pray to the kind providence of the universe that someone, anyone, would open their door. The choice, once viewed through the lens of compassion, became no choice at all. "Hey, over here, hurry!" Ethan yelled, his voice rough against the roaring wind, running to meet them near the gate. He reached the woman first. She was shaking violently, leaning heavily on a cheap inverted umbrella. Her eyes, when they met his, were wide, vacant, and filled with a profound, consuming panic. "I need to find the train station," she mumbled, her voice frail as dry leaves. "He said he'd meet me at the train station. Who are you? Where is my bag?" Ethan gently took her arm. Her skin was freezing, but her eyes held a feverish, confused glint. She was completely disoriented. The little boy, gasping for breath, clung to Ethan's leg. "Please," the boy whispered, tears mixing with the rain on his cheeks. "She was fine, and then she didn't know me. We just got lost. Please help her." "It's okay. You're safe now," Ethan said, pulling the boy tight against his muddy jeans for a brief second. "Come on, both of you, fast." He guided the frail woman, Mrs. Eleanor Vance, and the little boy, Leo, back towards the faint yellow light of the shed. Every step felt heavy, burdened not just by the rain and the mud, but by the weight of a monumental commitment. He was bringing two completely dependent strangers, one clearly ailing, into the only fragile refuge he had left. He had just lost his last harvest. Now he was giving away his remaining peace of mind. Inside the shed, the air instantly grew warmer, steam rising off their soaked clothes. Ethan pushed Leo toward the heater first, wrapping the child in his own dry, worn wool jacket. Leo sank onto the low stool, shivering, his sobs subsiding into ragged breaths. Mrs. Vance stood still, her gaze fixed vacantly on a wall, her lips moving silently. "I'm Ethan," he said gently, crouching down to meet Leo's eyes. "What's your name, buddy?" "Leo," the boy rasped, wiping his nose with the back of a small, muddy hand. "That's my grandma Eleanor. She forgot me." A heavy weariness settled over Ethan. He recognized the look in the old woman's eyes. It was more than just confusion. It was the empty terror of someone adrift in their own mind. "It's all right, Leo," Ethan said, his voice slow and reassuring. "We'll get her warm. I have some hot tea." He moved quickly to the small, cluttered utility corner where a kettle sat on a portable electric burner. His mind raced. Did he have ginger tea? No, only one bag of herbal mint left. Could he make broth? He checked his small, nearly empty refrigerator. Inside, there were 4 eggs, a carton of milk that was a day past its printed date, and 2 plastic containers, one with leftover roasted chicken, the other with a simple vegetable stock he had made from his last grade organic carrots. This stock was gold. He usually reserved it to make soup for Lily and Chloe during school days. Using it now meant his own girls would go without hot, nourishing soup for the next few days. He didn't hesitate. They needed more. Ethan poured the stock into a pan, adding a few thin slices of carrot and some crumbled flakes of dried chicken meat. He lit the burner, and soon the shed filled with the comforting aroma of simmering, hearty broth. He looked at Leo, whose eyes were fixed on his grandmother with heartbreaking worry. Then he looked at his daughters asleep only a few feet away, safe beneath their blankets. If my girls see me close the door, he thought, pulling out the 3 mismatched ceramic bowls he owned, they'll learn to close the door on others too. And that is not the legacy I want to leave them. The storm outside raged on, but inside the small shed, a quiet defiance had taken root, fueled by a simple warm broth and the desperate hope that character mattered more than capital. The soft, buttery light of the small electric burner was the only thing standing against the oppressive gloom of the shed. Outside, the storm had settled into a relentless, icy drumming on the corrugated metal roof. Inside, the battle was just beginning. Ethan had managed to settle Mrs. Eleanor Vance onto the narrow, slightly sagging cot usually reserved for farm supply overflow. He had wrapped her tightly in a moth-eaten woolen blanket, the warmest item he owned, and gently placed a damp, cool cloth across her forehead. Leo, exhausted and trembling, was curled up on a low stool, clutching the bowl of warm, chicken-scented broth that Ethan had insisted he drink slowly. Ethan watched them, his body aching from the day's wasted effort battling the rising floodwaters in the field. He desperately needed to sleep, but the woman on the cot was anything but settled. Her breathing was shallow and uneven, and she kept picking at the edge of the blanket with restless fingers. "He's waiting for me," she murmured, her voice brittle and high-pitched. "At the red mailbox. He said he'd meet me there before the train leaves. I can't be late." "It's all right, ma'am," Ethan said gently, kneeling beside the cot. "There's no train here. You are safe in my house. It's pouring outside." His gentle assurance only seemed to fuel her rising anxiety. Her eyes snapped open wide and unfocused, searching the dark corners of the shed. "You don't understand," she cried, trying weakly to push herself up. "He'll think I forgot. He'll think I don't care about the farm. I must go now." This was the peak moral crisis Ethan had feared. He realized she was not simply confused. She was experiencing a severe psychological episode, likely a combination of the trauma of being lost and the progression of her illness amplified by the high fever. Ethan placed his hand lightly on her shoulder, using a soothing, steady pressure. "Please, Mrs. Vance, you have a fever. You need to rest. You are just fine right here. The man you are looking for knows you are safe." She struggled harder, her strength surprising in her frailty. She fought his touch, mistaking his attempt to help for restraint. "Don't touch me. Who are you? You look like a farmer." She gasped, her voice thick with fear and confusion. "I don't know you, let me go." Her voice, though weak, was loud enough to pierce the fragile peace of the room where Lily and Chloe slept. Ethan's heart leaped. He glanced desperately toward the small doorway. He needed to keep her quiet, not only for her safety, but for his daughters. The last thing they needed was to wake up to a strange, feverish woman screaming. He pulled back, raising his hands in a gesture of surrender. Okay, I won't touch you, but please look at the boy. Look at Leo." Mrs. Vance followed his gaze, her eyes landing on Leo, who sat frozen on the stool, tears beginning to spill again, silent and steady. For a second, a flicker of recognition, or maybe just maternal instinct, crossed her face, but it vanished instantly. "That boy keeps following me," she whispered, sinking back into the pillow, exhausted by the brief struggle. "He shouldn't be here." A deep, bone-weary sigh escaped Ethan's lips. He felt the heavy weight of his sleepless nights, his financial worries, and now the profound responsibility for these two people pressing down on him. He hadn't slept properly in weeks, constantly waking up to check online orders or to worry about the rent. Now, sleep was an impossible luxury. He sat on the floor, leaning against the cold wall, and focused on his breath. He had to struggle to keep her safe without frightening her further. He knew he couldn't take her to a hospital. The simple truth was that he lacked the funds and proper insurance to admit two unknown patients, and he couldn't risk leaving his sleeping children alone in a remote area during a flash flood warning. He was on his own. He made a decision he would use the simplest remedies he had. He fetched a thermos of the mint tea, his last tea bag, and persuaded Mrs. Vance to drink a few sips, hoping the warmth and herbs might help. He replaced the cold cloth on her forehead, doing his best to ignore her occasional panicked ramblings about lost keys and missed appointments. The hours stretched long and agonizing. Leo was terrified, leaning into Ethan's side whenever the woman cried out, his small hand gripping Ethan's flannel shirt like a lifeline. "She's going to die, isn't she, Ethan?" Leo whispered, his voice small and broken. Ethan pulled the boy closer, smoothing his wet hair. "No, buddy. She's just very tired and her mind is confused right now. But we're here, and you were so brave to stay with her. She knows you love her." It was in those small, intimate moments of deep vulnerability that Ethan felt his purpose most keenly. His own crisis of survival faded behind the immediate need to provide comfort and stability. He looked over at the little doorway leading to the children's section of the shed. He thought about the $3,400 he owed, about the ruined root vegetables, and about the eviction notice that loomed for the December 2025 deadline. He had sacrificed his last source of nourishment, the stock, and his last chance at rest. "This is it," he thought, shivering slightly. "This is where I hit zero." But he held Leo tighter. The boy's complete reliance on him reinforced Ethan's determination not to give up. Ethan silently reiterated his guiding principle, the moral lesson he lived by, which now burned as brightly as the fever in the woman before him. "If I close the door now, I will teach my daughters that money is more important than people." His choice to stand by these strangers, facing the extreme risk of complete financial ruin, heightened the justification for his future reward. His character was being tested, and he chose compassion over solvency. Around 4 o'clock in the morning, the rain eased to a drizzle, and a profound silence settled over the shed. Ethan, his head resting against the wall, jolted awake. He noticed the difference immediately. Mrs. Vance's breathing was deep and even. The high flushed color had drained from her cheeks, leaving her pale but calm. The restless picking at the blanket had stopped. He replaced the cool cloth, his fingers trembling slightly. He sat back watching her intently, waiting for the panic to return. But it didn't. After another hour of peaceful rest, Mrs. Vance slowly opened her eyes. They were clear, sharp, focused. She looked at Ethan, then her gaze traveled to Leo, who had finally drifted into a deep sleep, his head resting against Ethan's hip. A soft, tired gasp escaped her lips. "Leo," she whispered, her voice rough but fully present. "Oh, my dear Leo." She reached out and gently touched the boy's hair. Leo stirred, blinking groggily, then his eyes snapped wide open when he saw his grandmother looking at him with recognition. "Grandma," he whispered. "Yes, sweetheart, it's me." Tears streamed down her face, tears of relief and deep, agonizing shame. She struggled to sit up, holding the blanket around her. She looked directly at Ethan, her gaze steady. You kept us safe. All night, she said, her voice weighted with exhaustion and gratitude. I remember the rain now, and bits of the confusion. It gets like that sometimes. But last night, that was the worst. Ethan just nodded. "You're safe now, Mrs. Vance." She lowered her head, the shame evident in her posture. "I have early-stage Alzheimer's, Mr. Rourke. I was diagnosed in 2024. I was supposed to be fine for years. I thought I could manage. I was terrified of burdening my son." She took a shaky breath. Mrs. Vance confessed her illness and the attempt to conceal it from her family. "I need my phone," she said, her hands trembling. "I have to call him. He must be out of his mind with worry." Ethan pulled out his old battered phone, its screen spiderwebbed with cracks, and handed it to her. She dialed the number, her thumb hovering over the call button for a long, agonizing moment, gathering every ounce of courage she possessed. Finally, she pressed dial. The phone rang twice. Then a man's voice, sharp, tense, and utterly ragged with fear, burst through the small speaker. Mother, where are you? Are you all right?" Mrs. Vance called Marcus Vance, her son, and relief immense and powerful finally washed over Ethan. The silence in the shed was broken only by the low, strained voice of Mrs. Eleanor Vance speaking into Ethan's cracked phone, and the soft, hurried reply from the other end. Marcus Vance sounded simultaneously desperate, relieved, and furious. Ethan could hear the man's rapid-fire questions. Where were they? Was she hurt? Why hadn't she called sooner? "I'm so sorry, son," Eleanor said, tears welling again. "I'm safe. We're both safe. We're at a farm just outside Harmony Creek. A kind man, Ethan Rourke, took us in. He saved us, Marcus." She provided the vague directions to Ethan's property landmarks, like the dilapidated red barn and the enormous ancient oak tree that marked the property line. Ethan stood quietly holding Leo, who had burrowed into his chest, still clinging to the last threads of sleep. Within 30 minutes, the distant roar of a powerful engine sliced through the damp morning air. The sound grew rapidly, culminating in the sudden sharp crunch of expensive tires on the gravel drive. A sleek obsidian black SUV pulled to an abrupt halt outside the shed. It was an intimidating vehicle, polished to a mirror shine, reflecting the overcast sky like a dark, expensive shield. The vehicle served as a stark contrast to the humble, cluttered reality of Ethan's life, the peeling paint on the shed, the muddy boots piled by the door, and the fragile economy held together by salvaged wood and organic soil. The driver's door flew open. A tall man in his late 30s, mid-40s, unfolded himself from the seat. Marcus Vance was dressed in a tailored suit jacket draped over a crisp shirt, now rumpled and stained from what looked like a night spent driving and searching. His face was a map of exhaustion, stubble dark against his jaw, his eyes wide and vacant from fear. He didn't bother knocking. He burst through the door, his frantic gaze sweeping across the small, crowded space until it locked onto the sight of his mother and son. Mother Leo. The single word, mother, was a raw, guttural cry that conveyed a lifetime of devotion and terror. Marcus's knees gave out and he dropped to the concrete floor in front of the cot, clutching Eleanor's hands as if anchoring himself to reality. I thought I had lost you," he choked out, unable to finish the thought. The scene was intensely private, an overflow of familial devotion. Ethan discreetly guided Leo to a small corner where Lily and Chloe, roused by the noise, were peering out with wide, curious eyes. After several minutes of tearful, whispered reunion, Marcus finally stood, taking a deep, ragged breath. He turned to Ethan, his eyes still red, but now focusing with gratitude. "You," Marcus said, his voice heavy with emotion. "You are Ethan Rourke. You brought them in. You saved them." Ethan, standing tall despite his muddy clothes and exhaustion, nodded simply. "They needed help, sir. I couldn't leave them in the storm." Marcus extended his hand, gripping Ethan's firmly. "I owe you everything. I called every hospital within 100 miles. I was completely helpless. I don't know how to repay you." Ethan offered a gentle smile. "No need for repayment, Mr. Vance. Just take good care of your mother and son." Marcus, however, didn't let go of Ethan's hand immediately. The powerful executive brain, even when scrambled by panic and relief, began to process the environment. Marcus was not only grateful that his mother and son were saved, the businessman in him was analyzing. His eyes, moving slowly from Ethan's tired, honest face, scanned the shed, the handwritten receipts tacked to the wall, the worn but impeccably clean blankets, the meticulously organized crates of organic kale, bright carrots, and heritage squash. He saw the care, the level of detail in the packing, the clear quality of the produce that Ethan had fought the storm to protect. "You grew these?" Marcus asked, walking over to the small homemade shelving unit, where Ethan displayed a few jars of pickled vegetables and organic jams. "Yes, sir," Ethan replied. "It's how I make our living, organic farm to table. It's what I believe in." Marcus picked up a jar of bright red organic tomato jam. He noted the simple, elegant labeling and the rich color of the contents. He knew the supply chain. He knew how few small, honest operations maintained this level of integrity and quality while also facing the enormous financial pressure of organic farming. Business rationale and gratitude. Marcus looked back at Ethan, seeing not a struggling farmer, but a man who risked his last resources, his warmth, his food, his rest for strangers. He realized that Ethan's profound character was reflected in the quality of his work. Marcus understood that this integrity and quality was a business asset that money could not buy. He knew he could find 1,000 farms, but he would never find another grower with Ethan Rourke's moral foundation. "Mr. Rourke," Marcus began, his voice shifting from gratitude to a firm, decisive tone of strategic thinking. "My company, Vance Global Organics, distributes high-end organic produce to restaurants and markets across the eastern United States. We spend fortunes trying to locate suppliers with this level of dedication." He set the jar down. "I want to help you, not as a thank you, but as an investment." Ethan frowned, the exhaustion preventing him from fully grasping the shift. "An investment, sir, I appreciate that, but I need to focus on finding a way to pay the rent for December 2025. Marcus cut him off, his voice warm and commanding. "I want to propose a strategic business partnership, leveraging Ethan's genuine talent and dedication. I will buy your entire current inventory at twice the market rate right now. And I want to set up a contract for everything you can grow on a long-term, mutually beneficial arrangement." He paused, letting the scope of the offer sink in. "More importantly, I want to take the uncertainty away. Effective immediately, I will cover the lease on this land and the house for the next 3 years. The offer of never having to worry about rent is the perfect substantial reward for the extreme risk you took. You risked everything to help my family. I will ensure you have the security you deserve to care for yours." Ethan was speechless. The weight of $3,400, the fear of homelessness, the ruined harvest, all of it dissolved in an instant. I don't know what to say, Mr. Vance. Say you accept, Marcus said, extending his hand again. You focus on growing your perfect crops and being a father. I'll handle the logistics. Ethan looked at his daughters now holding hands and gazing wide-eyed at the impressive stranger. He looked at Eleanor smiling peacefully on the cot. He took a deep, steadying breath, feeling hope bloom in the empty space where despair had reigned only hours ago. I accept. The subsequent hours were a whirlwind. Maintaining momentum, Marcus, true to his word, immediately mobilized resources. He made a dozen rapid-fire calls to his chief operating officer, his company lawyer, and a security detail to bring a vehicle large enough to transport his mother and Leo comfortably. The lawyer arrived by midday, drafting a preliminary agreement on the spot. It included the 3-year lease payment, the immediate purchase of the entire organic farm inventory, and a preliminary contract outlining the formation of a local cooperative. Ethan accepted. They established the Compassionate Harvest Co-op named by Marcus, who felt the kindness shown should be the brand's foundation, with Ethan as the head of quality and production and primary supplier. Marcus ensured Ethan retained creative and operational control over the growing process. By the evening of that momentous day, Marcus had arranged for Eleanor to be comfortably situated in a nearby assisted living facility specializing in Alzheimer's care, ensuring Leo could visit every day. 3 weeks later, the old shed was bustling. It had been refurbished, cleaned, and supplied with new equipment. Ethan was no longer fighting for scraps. He was managing a supply chain. The co-op not only achieved commercial success, but also began creating jobs and opportunities for other small farmers and seniors in the community. Ethan hired a single mother to help with packing and a retired neighbor to manage deliveries. Eleanor, on her lucid days, found purpose again by meticulously labeling the jars of jam that Ethan still produced, feeling useful and valued. Ethan stood in his newly organized packing room, watching Lily and Chloe laugh while stacking clean boxes. He remembered the cold fear of the storm, the heavy weight of the unpaid bills, and the profound exhaustion. Concluding theme. He smiled, a genuine, deep-seated sense of peace settling over him. He realized that the greatest investment he had ever made was not in organic seeds or expensive irrigation. It was in the moment he chose to ignore the voice of caution, to override financial logic, and to simply open his door to strangers. The story ends by confirming that Ethan's act of kindness and sacrifice was the wisest investment, opening the door to success and community for himself. Ethan Rourke's journey reminds us that life's true yield is not measured by the crops we harvest, but by the seeds of compassion we dare to plant. The greatest reward is found not in what we desperately hold on to, but what we choose to give away. If this story of hope and sacrifice resonated deep in your heart, please help us cultivate this garden of humanity by subscribing to our channel. Share your own tale of kindness in the comments, and don't forget to watch the newest inspiring story about unbreakable loyalty showing on your screen right now.